Some stories refuse to die, not because someone carved them in stone, not because monks copied them by candlelight, but because human voices kept them breathing, generation after generation, across 8 centuries of telling and retelling. Imagine this. A child sits on the packed earth of a palace courtyard, 7 years old. His legs curl beneath him like question marks. He has never once felt the ground push back against his feet, never known the simple violence of running, of falling, of chasing. Outside these walls, other children play. Their laughter drifts over like smoke from a fire he cannot warm himself by. His own brother calls him curse. The king's wives spit when they pass his mother in the corridor. And somewhere in the shadows of the court, men are already weighing the cost of his removal. But they do not know what sleeps inside him. Before his first breath, a prophecy was spoken. Hunters who walked between worlds delivered it to his father, the king. This is the story of Sundiata Keita, the Lion of Mali. The griots have a rule. Before you tell a great man's story, you name his mother first. Her name was Queen Sogolon. The court laughed at her. They laughed at her son, too. 7 years they laughed. Then he stood up, and nothing in West Africa was ever the same. It was the 1200. The old Ghana Empire had collapsed. Not in a single battle, in a slow unraveling drought, overextended trade routes, the pressure of surrounding kingdoms pressing in from every side. In its wake, smaller states scrambled for the pieces. One of them was Niani, in what is now Guinea. Its king was Magan Kon Fata, respected, comfortable, governing his modest realm with steady, predictable hands. Then 2 hunters arrived at his court. They were seers, wanderers who claimed to read through the skin of time. And they carried a message that would change everything Magan believed about his own future. You will marry a woman the court dismisses. She will give you a son, and that son will unite the Mandinka people and rule an empire. Every king wants greatness for his bloodline, but prophecies are cheap. Anyone can claim to read tomorrow. Then they brought her forward. Her name was Sogolon Konde. The griots describe her without mercy, hunched, plain, the kind of woman powerful people simply did not see. She had no status, no obvious value. She had been cast out, surviving at the edges of belonging. But the hunters insisted she carried something more precious than beauty. She was connected, spiritually, through the traditions of her homeland, to forces most people could not even perceive. The court was barely hiding its laughter. Magan's first wife, Sasuma Berete, beautiful, powerful, already mother to a strong son named Dankaron, smiled with quiet satisfaction. This strange woman was no threat to her plans. But Magan listened, and he married Sogolon, whether from faith, ambition, or simply curiosity. We cannot know. History rarely shows us the inside of a king's calculation. What we know is the result. Sogolon bore a son. They named him Sundiata, the hungering lion. And he could not walk. 1 year, he crawled. 2 years, still crawling. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. While other boys trained, sparred, and learned to hunt, Sundiata watched from the ground. The whispers became open mockery. Sasuma seized her opportunity with vicious pleasure, publicly, loudly, making sure every ear caught it.
Where is this great king you were promised? My son runs and hunts, while yours crawls like an infant. Tell me again about this prophecy." The servants joined in. Court officials exchanged knowing looks. Even Magan, who had believed enough to marry Sogolan, began to waver. He looked at his crawling son and wondered if the hunters had been frauds. Sogolan bore it all, every insult, every pitying glance, every calculated cruelty. And she never stopped believing, not for a single day.
The breaking point arrived on an ordinary morning. Sogolan needed baobab leaves, common leaves used across West Africa for cooking and medicine, a simple household task. But Sasuma had forbidden the palace staff from helping her, so Sogolan had to beg neighbors. And when word reached Sasuma, she sent a servant with a bundle of leaves, but the gift came wrapped in venom. The servant delivered them publicly in the courtyard where everyone could hear. "Here are leaves for the mother of the boy who cannot walk. At least my son Dankaran can stand on his own feet." The courtyard froze. Servants looked away. Children stopped playing to watch. Sogolan took the leaves, walked back to her dwelling, and the tears came. Not quiet tears, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. This was not about leaves. This was years of accumulated pain reaching its breaking point. This was watching her son humiliated daily while she stood powerless. Sundiata heard his mother crying. He had never heard her break like this. Sogolan, who held her head high when others laughed, who never complained, who kept believing when there was nothing to believe in. She was crying like her heart was shattering. And something in the boy hardened, not into bitterness, into decision. He called for the royal blacksmith, and his voice, the griots record this, carried an authority that shocked everyone who heard it. This was not a crippled child speaking. "Make me an iron staff, the strongest iron you have." The blacksmith hesitated. He had seen the boy's condition. He knew what everyone knew. But something in Sundiata's eyes stopped his objections. He went to his forge and created something massive, so heavy that grown men struggled to carry it. Perhaps he was testing the boy, perhaps trying to prove the impossibility. Either way, he obeyed. Word spread through the palace faster than fire. The crippled prince was going to try to stand. Everyone must see this. Some came hoping for miracle. Most came expecting humiliation. Sasuma came, savoring what she believed would be final proof of her rival's foolishness. Sundiata gripped the iron with both hands. He pulled. The staff bent. But he rose. His arms shook. His entire body trembled. Those legs, those useless legs, began to straighten. Slowly. Impossibly. His knees locked, his feet planted, his spine extended. And Sundiata stood. Then he walked. Each step longer, stronger, more certain, as if 7 years of stored power were flooding into muscles that had never been used. He walked to the baobab tree. He uprooted it, carried it to his mother, laid it at her feet. "You will never need to beg for baobab leaves again." The oral tradition gives him this gesture. We cannot verify it literally, but here is what the image means and why the griots kept it across 8 centuries of telling. The boy who had been used as evidence of his mother's worthlessness had just become proof of something else entirely. Sasuma watched from a distance. Her face was not relieved. It was not enough to make him safe. It was enough to make him dangerous. Asuma did not wait. She could not kill Sundiata openly. That would look like fear. So she did the next best thing. She drove them out. Sundiata, Sogalan, his siblings, pushed from Niani into the wilderness, made irrelevant by distance, stripped of palace, status, and protection, given nothing but what they could carry. It did not work. Exile taught Sundiata things no palace ever could. He spent time at the court of Jedeba, where a king recognized something in the young exile and kept him close. He watched how alliances were built across ethnic lines, not through sentiment, but through mutual interest, carefully tended over time. He moved to Tabone in the highlands and learned terrain that would matter in ways he could not yet predict. He earned his first military reputation in small border conflicts, not glorious, but formative. Unable to rely on title or birthright, Sundiata learned to lead through character alone. He was generous when others were selfish, humble when others were arrogant. He made friends across every social level, warriors, hunters, even the children of slaves. Because Sundiata, who had spent years being judged by what he could not do, had learned to judge people by who they actually were. These friendships seemed unremarkable at the time. They were quietly building the foundation of his future army. Sogalan stayed through all of it. The oral tradition does not make her a passive figure waiting to be rescued by her son's destiny. She negotiated. She guided. She kept the family together through foreign courts that could have swallowed them whole. On the nights when exile felt permanent, she reminded her son what he was meant for. She died. In a foreign land, far from Niani, far from everything she had sacrificed to protect. She never saw home again. She never saw the prophecy fulfilled. She died still believing, which is perhaps the most extraordinary thing about her. The epic says Sundiata wept. Then he received word from home. Simaoro Kante was not simply a villain. He was a project. The king of Soso had spent decades filling the vacuum left by Ghana's collapse. He was blacksmith king. His people controlled metalwork and, by extension, weapons. He turned that economic leverage into military dominance. Kingdom after kingdom fell before him. The oral tradition calls him a sorcerer whose invincibility could not be broken by normal weapons. Historians read something more precise behind that language. A ruler who had mastered the politics of terror so completely that resistance felt metaphysically impossible. When your enemies believe you cannot be killed, you are, in practical terms, nearly unkillable. He conquered the Mandinka homeland. Dankaran Tuman, Sundiata's half-brother, the man who had driven him into exile, ran, abandoned his people and his kingdom. He died in obscurity, forgotten and ashamed. In their darkest hour, someone remembered the prophecy. They found Sundiata, and they did not ask a prince to come home. They asked a general to save them. There is something worth pausing on here. Sumarro Kante and Sundiata Keita were not opposites. They were two men who had each built power from nothing in the ruins of a collapsed world. The difference was not strength or ambition or intelligence. It was method. One ruled through isolation and terror. The other was about to prove that alliance could beat both. Sundiata began the way all great leaders begin, not by demanding loyalty, by earning it. He called in every debt from the exile years, every king who had sheltered his family, every warrior who had respected his character when he had nothing to offer, every hunter who had sensed something different in this displaced prince. But he also offered something new, something that set him apart from every conqueror who came before. He did not promise conquest. He promised partnership. Any kingdom joining him against Sumaoro would not become a subject of the Mali Empire. It would become part of it, autonomous, with its own rulers and customs, bound together by mutual defense and shared prosperity. It was an idea born from his years of exile, from watching fragmented kingdoms fall one by one, from understanding that strength came from unity rather than subjugation. It was federalism, conceived in 13th century West Africa. Kingdom after kingdom joined. Each success made the next easier because word spread. The prophesied king was returning. And crucially, he was winning people to his cause not through threats or bribes, but through the force of his vision. There was also Bala Faseke, Sundiata's childhood griot, who had stayed behind in Niani when the family fled into exile. He had served Dankaran. Then, when Niani fell, he served Sumaoro. Not from betrayal. Griots had special status in West African society, their loyalty ultimately to history and culture, not to any single ruler. But Bala had used his proximity wisely. He had watched Sumaoro, studied his court, eventually entered his forbidden chamber, a room no one else was permitted to enter on pain of death, and discovered the source of the Sorcerer King's power and its weakness. Every sorcerer in West African tradition had a totem, an object or animal that anchored their power. Sever that connection, and the invincibility collapsed. Sumaoro's vulnerability was the rooster, specifically an arrow tipped with a white rooster's spur. Bala escaped Soso and carried this knowledge across dangerous country to find Sundiata's camp. The reunion was joyful. They had been boys when they separated. Now they were men, both shaped by years of hardship neither had chosen. The bond between them, rather than weakening with distance and time, had only deepened. The arrow was prepared with ritual and ceremony. The army was assembled. Now came the Battle of Kirina. The year was 1235. Sumaoro's forces were larger, and his sorcery was having its effect. Sundiata's warriors mysteriously weakened when engaging the Sorcerer King's elite guards. Arrows veered off course. Spears thrown with precision somehow missed. It was as though the battlefield itself had been tilted against them. Sundiata watched and understood. Conventional combat would not decide this. He called for his bow and the special arrow. His warriors formed a wedge and drove toward Sumaoro through the chaos of the battle, dying to clear the path. They did it willingly. They understood what was at stake. Finally, Sundiata was close enough. Sumaoro looked at him across the field and laughed. "The crippled child has come to face me. Your prophecy is a lie." Sundiata said nothing. He drew his bow. Everything slowed. His entire life concentrated into a single point. The years on the floor of the palace, the exile, his mother dying in a foreign land, the prophecy she carried to her grave still believing. He released. The arrow struck. Not a killing blow, but Sumaoro screamed, not in pain, in shock, in terror. His invincibility was broken. For the first time in years, he bled. Panic spread through his army like fire through dry grass. If the sorcerer king could bleed, he could die. And if he could die, there was no reason to keep fighting for him. Sumaoro fled. His army, built on fear rather than loyalty, collapsed the moment he left the field. Warriors threw down weapons. Others surrendered. What had been an organized force moments before became a rout. The oral tradition offers different endings for Sumaoro. Captured, died of wounds alone, disappeared into a mountain becoming stone, a permanent warning about the cost of tyrannical power. What matters is this: he was gone. His reign of terror was finished. And the man who could not walk had just won West Africa and decided to build a civilization. Sundiata could have simply taken a throne. He built a civilization instead. He called a great assembly at Kurukan Fuga, inviting leaders not just from kingdoms that had supported him, but also those who had remained neutral or even fought against him. It was radical inclusion that set the tone for everything that followed. What emerged was the Kurukan Fuga, a governing framework for the Mali Empire. It established accountability and leadership, property rights, protections for women within the social system, provisions against the mockery of people with disabilities, shaped, without question, by the memory of a king who had once crawled on a palace floor while a court laughed. For the 13th century, anywhere in the world, this was serious political architecture. He also formalized the role of the griots as political witnesses, the jelly, whose official function was to watch power, record it, and speak it aloud. An accountability system built entirely from memory and voice. The Mali Empire controlled the gold and salt trade routes connecting West Africa to North Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. It attracted merchants, scholars, and craftspeople from across the known world. The universities of Timbuktu became centers of learning rivaling any institution in the medieval world. The empire Sundiata built lasted 4 centuries. 78 years after his death, it produced Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324, gold distributed so extravagantly that it caused inflation across Egypt and the Arab world, remains the most dramatic single demonstration of African wealth in recorded history. None of it happens without Kirina. None of it happens without the exile. None of it happens without Sogolon, who carried her children through foreign courts, negotiated their survival in kingdoms that wanted nothing to do with them, and died in a strange land, still believing in a prophecy she would never live to see fulfilled. History has a bias. It remembers power that announced itself early, power that inherited, power that was never in doubt. Sundiata was none of these things. He was a child, used as proof that his mother was worthless. He was an exile who spent years in other men's courts, watching and waiting and learning. He was a general who won not by being the strongest man in the room, but by being the man others chose to follow. The griots did not preserve his story for 800 years because he was born great. They preserved it because he understood something that rulers who inherit power rarely learn. Strength that is given can be taken. Strength built in exile, in patience, in the long work of earning trust, that kind stays. For more African stories like this, please like and subscribe. And if you enjoyed this one, you should see the next story.